Guys, so weather's warmed up. Heater's turned off, doors open, it's 17 degrees, beautiful sunny afternoon, spring, first day of spring, feels like it too. And those flowers are still going on that tree, which is 4 months, and they'll probably start again soon because spring's coming. Weird. Anyway, so it's been widely reported across the different news outlets this week about a McDonald's in Kanagawa that banned the local junior high school students from going to its store. So I've been reading different reports from different news organisations, trying to get the more reputable ones to try and get a clear idea of what's going on. It seems that they had lots of problems with bad behaviour from these junior high school kids, and the police had been called a number of times, and teachers from the school had attended a number of times to try and sort them out. They'd talked to the media talked to the deputy principal, and he said the first he heard about it was just a couple of months ago, but McDonald's said they'd talked to the school quite a lot to try to sort it out, and they hadn't been able to reach any sort of solution, so they banned the kids. So they put a sign up at the door of the McDonald's saying that the students from this junior high school, named the junior high school, are no longer allowed to attend to go into that store or be in the car park either. Apparently they're having trouble in the car park with these students as well. So it's a little bit rare here, which is why it's been widely reported, because it is very rare. Usually the kids here are fairly well behaved and fairly well disciplined, and usually, particularly when they're representing their school and they're wearing their school uniforms, usually they're behaving even better because they're aware of the fact that if they misbehave in public that they can get in big trouble from their schools. And so usually they behave really well. So this is very unusual. However, I've got to say, I'm not terribly surprised. There's been a few things that have happened just in the last couple of weeks where I've had examples of exactly the same thing. We were in a food court during the day, sort of mid-afternoon recently on a school day, and there's always in that particular food court, there's always school kids there in different uniforms from different schools, and usually they're pretty well behaved. They get a bit noisy now and again, but that's normal for kids, isn't it, you know? But this week when we were there was a group of boys and they were right out of control, and don't know if they were aware of it or not, but they were super loud and really disturbing people. People were moving, people were looking at them. It was a real thing, you know. It was a real problem. It was over the top. There was no excuse for it. It was really bad behaviour. So much so that I wouldn't have been surprised if someone had called the police on them, because they were right out of hand, being really over the top, out of control, which is obviously what these kids were doing at this McDonald's. And then same this week as well. I was driving down a road here, a fairly narrow road, only one lane each way, with no sort of space either side, no footpath either side, just a little sort of narrow bike lane space on either side. And these two kids came the other way, and they would have been at 13 or 14, and if they rode single file right over on the side, it would have been okay, but they're actually on the wrong side of the road, so they're heading towards me, and they were side by side. And one of them was actually in the middle of my lane, heading towards me, and he had sunglasses on, and you could just tell the whole demeanour of this kid was really arrogant. Had his phone in his hand, and he's looking at his phone, riding down the street, and he's looking at me. He knew I was coming, and he just kept going. And there wasn't a car coming the other way, fortunately, so I had to move over to the opposite lane to go around him. And I hit the horn and looked in the mirror, and they've stopped and they've looked back. You know, and just the whole demeanour was just really not cool. Usually Japanese kids, if they do behave badly, and I'd say this is true of the majority still, that if they do behave badly and you call them on it, usually, oh, sumimasen, and they'll say, I'm sorry, and they'll bow. You know, over the years, occasionally some kid's done something, oh, you know, and they go, oh, sumimasen. But no, these kids were really arrogant. And also within the last 2 weeks, I was outside a train station, and just sitting waiting for a friend to turn up, and these two dudes walked past, and I saw this one piece of plastic fall to the ground, and I thought maybe he dropped it by accident. I didn't say anything. And then I saw the next one. So he's obviously unwrapping something, and the first part of the wrapping just fell to the ground. That's what I saw first, and I thought maybe it was an accident, and I didn't say anything. And then I saw him continue to unwrap this thing and just just throw it on the ground. And I said, oi! And he looked over, dummy, or I said, so oi is universal, isn't it? They use it here. It is fairly rude. Friends will use it with each other, parents use it with kids. Oi, just to get their attention. And oi! And he looked at me and dummy, or and which that's no good. That's no good. And he's just looked at and his mates. They both stopped. They both looked at me, and then walked on off. Those two would have been probably a bit older. They would have been 16 or 17, but really arrogant, really arrogant. Majority of Japanese kids, in that case, would have gone, oh, sumimasen, and picked it up probably. But these two just sort of looked and just walked away, right? And also within the last couple of weeks, we were at a family thing, or a family and friends thing, and there was a kid there. He's about 10, and his mother wanted him to do something. Can't remember what it was. Wanted him to do something, and he didn't want to do it, and he just threw a tantrum. And this kid is a really smart kid. They actually lived in America for a while, and he's a really smart kid who speaks English really well, and he's a really smart kid. And he just threw a tantrum, and he was like a 2-year-old on the ground, bang, 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 and screaming. And then his mother, they do this, some parents here do this thing where they tell the kid to do something, the kid tells them to piss off, right? And then they grab the kid by the arm and physically try to take them where they want them to go. And you'll see this is a common thing. You'll see it in parks or shopping centres or supermarkets where a parent's trying to get a kid to do something and the kid's saying no. And so the parent's dragging the kid by the arm and the kid's dragging the other way. And they're physically pulling against each other, which just, I mean, you know, those of you who are parents will know that's just not good parenting. What are you doing? You know, do what you're told. You know, that'll be the end of it. And just this big tantrum and this big pull-push thing, and he's pushing at her, and we see that behaviour here. We see that behaviour, and it just does seem that, you know, there are a lot of kids here that are really good. You know, our kids have got cousins here who are just wonderful. They're really smart kids. They're super polite, really well-behaved kids. We got neighbours here who have kids, and they're super polite when you talk to them, super respectful, super polite, really well-behaved kids. And I would say that the majority of kids are like that, really. Majority of Japanese kids are like that, super polite, super well-behaved. When you talk to them, they're very respectful and use all the proper manners and that sort of thing. But there does seem to be, you know, more and more I'm seeing, compared with a couple of decades ago, you know, more and more I'm seeing this behaviour from these kids where the parents just don't seem to give them any discipline at all. You know, that one that was throwing the tantrum that was 10. A little bit later, she said something, and it gave me an opening. And I said to her, "Do you give him penalties?" And she said, "No, you know, I didn't really know about penalties." And because this kid's staring at his Switch all day, you know. And I said, "Do you ever take his Switch off him? His Nintendo, you know. Do you ever take his Nintendo off him if he behaves badly?" "Oh, he wouldn't like that." That's why it's a penalty, right? So we're seeing a lot of this, and I'm sure I'm seeing more of this than I did 20 years ago. I'm sure there's more examples of this. You know, people that we know and friends of friends, and just total strangers when we're out in restaurants, and just kids behaving really badly, and parents either oblivious because they're sitting there staring at their phone, and the kids standing up. I was just talking to someone about this afternoon at the sushi place. You know, kids standing up with their face on the food as the food goes past, which, you know, it's a big no-no, right? But the parents will be sitting there staring at their phones while the kids are doing this, and they won't even notice. So you get sort of like negligent parents, and then you soon get these other parents that just seem to be oblivious about any sort of modern parenting techniques. You know, where they just seem to have no idea about how to discipline their kids, and they have these fights with their kids where they're going, "Oh, come on, you know, come on." I don't know if I mentioned on a previous video, but we had a scene recently where there's this other family with these two kids, and 8 and 10, something like that, two of them, and both of them throwing a tantrum at the same time, and the mother was just lost. And you see that here all the time. These parents that are just, doshio, you know, what should we do, and sort of trying to, sort of pleading with them to do what they're told. And the kids just don't do it, obviously, because they know they don't have to. They know they don't have to listen to the kids. We know someone who's a psychologist, and I was talking to her about this recently, and I gave her an example of one of these ones that I'm telling you, and she said they've taught that kid that if they behave like that, they don't have to do what they're told. right? That was one of those kids, it might have been that boy that was throwing the tantrum. And when I told her about it, and she said, yeah, they've taught him that if he throws a tantrum, he won't have to do what they want him to do. So that's what he does. If there's something he doesn't want to do, he throws that tantrum, right? Which, to those of you watching who are parents, or even those of you watching who just have basic idea of human behaviour, you'll know that, right? It's obvious, isn't it? But not to a lot of these parents. They don't seem to get it, you know? So there's a lot of these parents that either through negligence, because they're too busy staring at their phones, or just through a lack of ability and not disciplining their kids. And then you've got the school. The schools now are scared to discipline their kids because they're all worried now about kids, you know, killing themselves or something else. So the schools have got this very soft approach now where they don't want to push the kids. So that's their policy now, is they don't push. And so, you know, the parents aren't disciplining them, the schools aren't disciplining them. There's one more thing to this too. I thought after those two dudes where I said, oi, you know, and said to them, that's, you know, dropping their rubbish is no good. And mate, that place too, that place outside that train station was this big court, beautiful with trees and things, and it was immaculate. And these two, that's what made me react to it, was that this immaculate space, and these guys this guy just discarding his rubbish as he walked into this clean space, you know. And I showed you guys a video recently of people throwing rubbish out the windows of their cars and things, but this was so blatant in the middle of this big open space, just tossed it, you know, and no fear at all. And I thought about that later. I remember a comedian, I can't remember who it was, one of the comedians said once that someone had behaved with all the confidence of someone who'd never been punched in the face, right? And that often comes to mind here. When you see bad behaviour here, it often comes to mind is that kids and adults here, that, you know, older blokes in particular, older guys in particular, that behave really badly, don't have a fear of getting any physical consequences. Now, obviously, living in a country where people are not violent is a wonderful thing, and it's one of the reasons that it's wonderful living here, and one of the reasons I love this place, is that violence is really rare, and people here are not violent usually, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. The only downside of that is that these guys have no fear of anything. They're not worried. You know, if I tell this guy, hey, that's no good, he has no fear at all that I'm going to lay a hand on him. No fear at all, because it's never happened to him. Because violence here is so rare, it would never have happened to him, and he never would have seen it. You know, and it's the same reason you get these older guys here that are really rude and disrespectful sometimes, because they've never been hit by anybody, and they've never seen anybody hit by anybody. So it's just not in their mind as being an option, as being something that could happen, which is a good thing. Again, living in a country where there's no fear of that happening is a wonderful thing, isn't it? You know, but you know, when you've got parents that aren't disciplining kids, and this is probably a minority, probably, you know, the majority of kids here are pretty well behaved, but there's this minority of parents who don't discipline their kids. The school doesn't discipline them either. The police here are pretty soft as well. They'll generally turn up and have a bit of a talk and make some notes and then drive away. So, you know, discipline from them. We showed you before the Bosselsoccer and all those sorts of examples where the cops just don't want the work, you know. They'd prefer to just write a parking ticket or something, traffic ticket. And then there's no fear of another man disciplining them or giving them a good beating, you know, which again is a good thing. I don't want to give the wrong impression about that, but just, you know, one of the things that would keep all those things, you know, discipline from parents, discipline from the school, discipline from police, or discipline from another member of the public, those four things would help keep people a little bit better behaved, keep kids a bit better behaved in general, wouldn't they? But when you take away those four, there's no consequences. So those kids behaving badly at McDonald's, there was no consequences. Obviously, McDonald's had spoken to the school, and the school hadn't done anything about it. And so now that all the students from that school are banned from that McDonald's, you know. And I'm not surprised at all. It would be unusual, and that's why it's getting reported in the news. So it would be unusual, but I'm not surprised at all because of the behaviour that I'm seeing myself. You know, those dudes, as soon as I heard the McDonald's story, I thought about the guys in that food court, because they were out of control. You know, always when you get groups of kids together, it gets noisy, right? That's sort of a nice thing usually, because happy kids being noisy, that's usually a good thing. But these dudes were like 15, 16 years old and just sort of almost purposefully out of control, where they didn't give a rat's about anybody around them. And there's adults there eating lunch, and there's all sorts of people sitting around, other kids sitting around behaving themselves. You know, nice atmosphere there. Usually it's a really nice atmosphere. But this group of fools, just terrible, absolutely terrible. You know, and no one was telling them. You know, I don't even think that food court even has security. You know, usually places like that here, shopping centres, if they have security, it's some 80-year-old guy outside collecting trolleys in a security uniform. The guardaman goes and collects the shopping trolleys from the car park. That's what he does. He's not going to go and sort out a bunch of dicks like that, you know. So anything and everything about Japan is what we make videos about. So this isn't a very positive one. Obviously, it's sad to see. I also recognise, as we've mentioned many times before, nothing that we report from Japan is only in Japan. So badly behaved teenagers is not unique to Japan, is it? And we're not saying it is. All we're saying is this is what we're seeing. This is what we've seen. Everything I just told you has been in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Everything I just told you. Nothing, you know, that's all happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a relatively common occurrence, this sort of bad behaviour. And I would suspect that it's going to continue to get worse, and I would suspect that we're going to see an increase in crime by these young guys, because when young guys have no boundaries and have no discipline, then they do whatever they want, then some of these guys, a small percentage of these guys, will probably end up doing behaviour that's actually criminal. So we'll see, won't we? We'll see if that's true. Just before I go, I remember seeing a thing. I can't remember enough detail to be able to quote it accurately, but I remember reading this thing years ago that said, it was a quote from a guy, and it said, young people these days aren't disciplined enough, and their behaviour is as a result of that. Something like that. You know, young people today behave badly, and not enough discipline, and that's why they behave badly, sort of thing. That sort of thing. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And then it actually had underneath it the name of the person who said it, and it was a Greek philosopher, like 2,500 years ago. So all the stuff that this old man just said has probably been said by every generation for the last 2,500 years, probably. But this is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing. And I swear, you know, 20 years ago, I can't remember any bad behaviour. This sort of stuff, the last few years, I've noticed this sort of stuff more and more. And I swear 20 years ago, there was never any of this. You know, 20 years ago, I remember making a video once, like 15 years ago, talking about how you'll see a group of guys sitting out, you know, high school kids sitting outside a convenience store, and as you walk past, you can say konnichiwa, and they'll all konnichiwa, they'll all answer, all really polite. I remember walking through the streets of Toyota City once, late at night, and these two dudes came the other way, and they looked a bit suspicious, and it was when I hadn't been here very long, and in Australia, I used to have a job that was fairly dangerous, you know, so I was always very alert to safety, and that sensitivity was still going on. So I was walking down this dark sort of street, these two dudes had come the other way, and I sort of switched on my senses, watch out for these guys, and as they walked past, they both went, konbanwa, right? That's the behaviour you usually get from young people here. They're respectful and polite, well behaved, so, and the majority still are. But I suspect we're going to see more stories like this, because, you know, not enough discipline going on, and a lot of negligent parenting and incompetent parenting, and it seems that everybody's too scared to discipline these kids and give them penalties. Just before I go, that what I mentioned about hitting things, I've never hit my kids, and I don't think hitting kids is necessary. So the thing I mentioned about they're not worried about getting hit for bad behaviour or being rude, I'm not saying that that's a good solution to anything, you know. I'm anti-violence in any sort, you know, so I think violence is not a thing. But the truth is that in lots of societies, if a young dude is disrespectful to another dude, there's a good chance he's going to get smacked for it, isn't there? You know, that could well happen. Whereas here, they just don't have that fear, because it just doesn't happen here. Actually, it just reminds me of another one. I was visiting my friend at a Juku once. He owns a Juku. And there was a kid there that was about 15 or 16. And I was trying to talk to the guy that owned the Juku. And this kid he just wanted to hear me talking because the Juku owner could speak English, and I speak English. And he sort of wanted to listen in, which is sort of understandable. But I said to him, hey, we're having a bit of an adult talk here. It's important, can you just leave us alone, please? And no. And he just stood there. And I said, no, look, come on. I had a limited amount of time. I needed to talk about something important with my friend, and then I needed to go. And I couldn't talk about it in front of this kid. So, like, listen, can you go in that other room just for 5 minutes while I finish talking, and then you can come? No. And I stood up and I said, go away. No. And he's just standing there looking up at me. No. Really, really arrogant. That kid pushed me, and I said to my friend, forget it, I'll talk to you later. And just because if I stood there, I was going to push this kid across the room because he was just really in my face. He had zero fear. Zero fear. I outweighed him by about 40 kilos and just zero fear, 50 kilos. Just looking up at me, with this arrogant face. God, just give us 5 minutes. And I started off really nice. Just please, just 5 minutes in the other room, then come back and I just need to talk. No. And go away. No. So I knew that it wasn't a good situation, so I said to my friend, forget it, I'll talk to you later, and I just left. So, not my job to discipline him, he was nothing to me, but good example, right? That kid hasn't had discipline in his life and just does whatever he wants, So that's just another one. And that story, by the way, that would have been 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was a long time ago, that one. So, they exist here. Anyway, anything and everything about Japan, this is what's happening this week. More videos coming soon.